Action Task Force meets on February 13, just about 10 days from now. Of course, Guyana is on a list of countries still to update its anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism laws. The laws in Guyana is currently before a special select committee. That committee has been meeting for some time now, since the bill was tabled for a second time in the National Assembly. I have with me today one member of that committee and of course the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh. Minister, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Thank you also for inviting me and for paying attention and showing interest in this extremely important matter.
Minister, we have merely 9 days. We can't say 10 because the 10th day, as it is now, is when the Financial Action Task Force meets. What is happening at the level of the Special Select Committee examining this bill?
Well, you would know that the second bill, that is to say the bill that was retabled after the previous Special Select Committee had completed its work, and after the opposition had voted against the bill, notwithstanding that that first committee had spent 8 months working on that bill. The second bill, the bill that government retabled after that previous experience, has been before a special select committee, was tabled in December or November, December of last year, has been before a special select committee which has been meeting since January. The committee has had a number of meetings and has been considering the bill in the normal course of things, the normal manner in which such committees do their work. The committee has met a number of times, perhaps 3-4 times at least. I have to say that our experience in this committee is very similar to our experience in the previous committee in a number of respects. First of all, from the very first meeting, government's anxiety to dispose of the work before the committee was very clear. The government members continue to indicate their availability to meet every day or as frequently as required and for as long as it was required. The opposition members, like they did in the predecessor committee, displayed what can only be described really as delay tactics, not being available every day and not being available for lengthy meetings and so on. But anyway, we managed to have a few meetings, and I believe we were making some progress, even if not nearly as quickly as we need to make progress, bearing in mind, like you said, FATF meets on the 13th of February. The next parliamentary sitting is the 10th of February, which is on Monday coming. So if we intend to catch the 13th, we really need to get the bill back to Parliament by the 10th of January for passage, approval, and then subsequently assent. Now, you ask about developments in the Special Select Committee, and I think it's timely that you asked that question because we did have a development last night which disturbs me considerably. As you well know, the proceedings of the Parliament are open and public. There is a public gallery in the Assembly chamber. There is a media desk. The proceedings of Parliament are recorded, broadcast, now I'm told live on the internet to the entire world, and essentially are open to all and sundry. The proceedings of Parliament are captured for posterity in a verbatim transcript called the Hansard. In much the same manner, the proceedings of committees are not secret proceedings. Verbatim records are maintained of committee proceedings, and those verbatim records form a part of the permanent parliamentary library collection. In the current instance, we have at least one major stakeholder group, the Private Sector Commission, which, as your viewers would know, is the umbrella body representing all of the major industry and sectoral groups, wrote the committee expressing their interest in the matter of the timely passage of the bill and indicated that they would like to be permitted to attend the committee meeting, to be present at the committee meetings strictly in an observer capacity. The government at no time had any difficulty with this proposal from the time the letter was received and communicated to us, and we made this clear. The opposition, I would say, sent mixed signals on the matter. On some occasions, we got the impression that they would have no difficulty with the Private Sector Commission being present. In fact, I gather that the Private Sector Commission is of the clear impression that the opposition had indicated to them that they would have no difficulty with the request. The Private Sector Commission asked me what would the government's position be in light of the opposition's apparent assurance to them that they would have no problem with it, and I said the government's position would be that we would have absolutely no problem with it either. The matter came up for determination yesterday. In fact, it has been on the agenda for a couple of weeks now, a couple of meetings now. It came up on the agenda yesterday, and the government made very clear our position that we have absolutely no problem with the Private Sector Commission, or indeed any other stakeholder group who might indicate an interest in doing so, being present in an observer capacity. We went further and we said we have no problem with the media being present. Were the media to be interested, we have absolutely no problem with the media being present at the proceedings of the committee. The opposition, I believe, engaged in a rather flimsy attempt to evade the issue. First of all, by putting a motion, or principally by putting a motion that stakeholder groups may attend on an ad hoc basis as the need arises, essentially saying, and they more or less said this in the, I have no doubt the verbatim transcript will reflect this, they more or less said they don't want the Private Sector Commission to attend as an observer. They would like the Private Sector Commission to be there only when invited to be there by the committee. And of course, the opposition has a majority on the committee. We objected to this. We said we see no reason why the committee's proceedings should be secret. We see no reason why the private sector should not be permitted to observe the proceedings. They have a very legitimate interest in the matter, that the private sector, private enterprise, business, commerce, industry are affected by the passage or non-passage by this bill. The economy, by extension, has the potential to be gravely affected, and so we believe they should be permitted to observe. Eventually, they maintained their objections, and when the chairman put the specific question, should the Private Sector Commission be permitted, I moved a motion, in fact, that the Private Sector Commission be permitted to attend all future meetings as an observer. They essentially staged a walkout, left the committee. One doesn't know whether that walkout is for that meeting, that issue, or whether they intend to stay away from the committee for the remainder of its proceedings. One really is not in a position to say. I suspect we will know later this afternoon, because the committee is scheduled to meet again at 5:15 this afternoon. But let me say this is a most unfortunate development, and it, when juxtaposed with other related developments, I think a picture is emerging. Recall that the Private Sector Commission had previously approached the National Assembly last year with a petition on the matter of the money laundering bill. And recall too that the opposition refused to grant leave, refused to approve of the motion that the petition be read. This is merely the Private Sector Commission expressing its views on a particular matter to the National Assembly, to the nation through the National Assembly. And at the time, I must say that I was extremely surprised and disappointed that the National Assembly of Guyana would deny an opportunity to such an important stakeholder group to simply express their views. This seemed to me to be an example of what I've described elsewhere as muzzling the private sector. But I then further juxtapose, yesterday's downright objection to the private sector's presence by the opposition, last December's objection to the Private Sector Commission's petition, With other national developments, the derailing of the Amila Falls project, attempted derailing of the Amila Falls project, attempted derailing of the Marriott project, the Muri project in south of Guyana. When I look at all of these developments, I see a situation that causes me some worry. I see an opposition that clearly is hostile to the private sector and has no difficulty intimidating investors out of Guyana, chasing investors out of Guyana essentially by frustrating their projects. And now, even in the case of the domestic private sector, attempting to essentially silence the domestic private sector by saying you will not be granted a voice. Well, not only silencing them, but perhaps blindfolding them, saying you not only will you not have a voice in the National Assembly, but you'll also not be permitted to see what is going on in the committee. Setting aside the fact that these people are citizens of Guyana, the leadership of the Private Sector Commission, they're citizens of Guyana. Setting aside that fact, they run large enterprises, they employ thousands of people, they generate hundreds of millions of dollars of economic activity in this country. And I think it's most irresponsible for an elected political party to be so dismissive of such an important stakeholder group.
No, but you mentioned a couple of the glaring examples of that of Amila and so forth. But if one is to look at the anti-money laundering, which will essentially should Guyana be blacklisted, essentially that will impact too on the business community.
Well, absolutely, and in fact, that is why they are as interested as they are in observing the proceedings of the committee, that is to say, the private sector. You're absolutely correct. Perhaps the money laundering bill itself is the best example, certainly amongst the most stark examples of hostility towards the private sector. The fact of the matter is that every private sector stakeholder group has said non-passage of this money laundering bill will affect business in Guyana. In fact, it is affecting business already. There are banks who have said that their correspondent banking relationships are already under jeopardy. There are banks who have said that they've been told by international clients that they cannot do transactions with Guyanese banks. In fact, I heard two separate commercial banks, have said to me that they have international customers who were told that if they continue to make transfers to banks in Guyana, that their banks with their overseas bank from which they're sending these funds will close their accounts. But this is happening right now. There are large businesses in Guyana that have been transacting routine transactions for years, and they're suddenly being asked reams of questions. I saw a questionnaire that was sent to a business in Guyana that has been doing business with a company, an overseas company, for more than 15 years. Suddenly they have been sent a long questionnaire to answer a long list of questions, because Guyana is now adversely viewed as it relates to money laundering matters, all because of the non-passage of this bill. This bill should have been passed a long time ago.
But Minister, we have to keep the focus on the time that's left. Based on the what you were saying, I'm getting the feeling that we haven't gone anywhere much with discussions on the actual amendments to the bill. What could be done now in just about 9 days?
Well, I will tell you this, that even before I come to the question you ask about what can be done now, the difficulty that we have is that I am not seeing a consistent message from the opposition on this matter. Indeed on other matters too, but particularly on this matter for the moment. You would recall that the leader of the opposition last year had said explicitly that his party's position was that they saw no nexus between the anti-money laundering bill and any unrelated issue. That was when the issue of the Public Procurement Commission came up. The Alliance for Change said, we would pass the bill as it is, as long as we get the Public Procurement Commission. So they basically said, well, we want to barter. That is what the Alliance for Change said. The APNU said, and indeed I believe it may have been the leader of the opposition himself, but forgive me if my memory fails me now, but the opposition said very clearly, we see no nexus. Our concern is that the bill needs a few changes. We have some suggestions to make, some further amendments to offer, and once those are addressed, we are okay with the bill. You will recall that that was said explicitly by the opposition last year. Lo and behold, we are now being told that there is a nexus between this bill and indeed any future bill brought by the government and presidential assent of some other bills, which incidentally the president has already addressed following the prescribed constitutional procedure. The president has sent those bills back to Parliament. He has, in the instances where he has withheld his assent, he has sent those bills back to Parliament in accordance with the prescribed constitutional procedure, providing his reasons for not withholding his assent. Suddenly, the APNU is seeking to establish a nexus between the money laundering bill and issues that were previously never on the table, never related to, never treated on the same agenda as the money laundering bill. Suddenly they're establishing a nexus where they themselves said last year that there is no nexus between their position on the money laundering bill and any other issue. So you have this lack of consistency. The same could be said, Mr. Granger said very recently, I think probably less than 2 or 3 weeks ago, that he is confident that the bill will be passed before the prescribed deadline.
I think it was the 20th or the 26th of January.
My memory is not as good as yours, but I do vividly recall, I certainly don't remember the date, but I saw the headline screaming out at me.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, I was filled with optimism. I thought, finally, some sanity appears to be prevailing. That statement was made publicly, that I believe he said, I am confident that the bill will be passed before the prescribed deadline. He said that publicly. Now suddenly, we're hearing a different tune. Indeed, the same can be said about other issues, the other issues related to the same matter. We heard that they have concerns about the bill and they have amendments to propose. Well, you know what? The bill has been before the previous select committee for 8 months. And this bill has been before this select committee, well, it has been in Parliament since December or late November, and it has been before the select committee since the start of this year. And we have not seen any articulation or documentation of what the concerns of the opposition, of the APNU in particular, what the concerns of the APNU are. If the APNU wishes to propose further amendments, I will call on them now, as I have called on them previously in the Parliament, to disclose to the nation. There must be a document. You've had this bill for 8 months now. You've had this bill since last year, April, the predecessor to this bill and now this current bill. Surely, having studied this bill for 8 months, you must have one sheet of paper that sets out these are our proposed amendments. That's how the Parliament works. You want to propose amendments to a bill, you put them down on a sheet of paper and you table those amendments. That's how committees work. You want to recommend changes to a bill, you document them and you put them on a sheet of paper. If the APNU has amendments that it wishes to propose to the bill, disclose those amendments to the nation. I made that call last year in the Parliament and I'm making it again now.
So there are no amendments on the table at the moment?
Well, not that have been documented. During the course of the discussion, clause by clause, sometimes views are expressed, both by government members and opposition members. That's how the committees typically work. And so their members, when they have attended the meetings, they have expressed views on specific clauses, but they haven't produced a single document that says these are the amendments that we want or these are the concerns that we have. Such a document hasn't been prepared. We have prepared what our position is. Our position is the bill. And the government would pass the bill as it is right now. We would have passed it last November, last December, as it was on that day. Now, with the benefit of some stakeholder views and so on, we'd be willing to look at those stakeholder views and consider how they affect the bill, and to the extent that they can be accommodated, accommodate them and pass the bill as is, subject to those amendments.
But I asked you the question just now about what could be done now
Yes, indeed.
within this period of time.
Well, the committee will continue its work. It's, as you know, meets under the chairmanship of the Chief Whip, Teixeira. And so she has convened a meeting at 5:15 this afternoon, at which I will be present along with my colleagues on the government side. It remains to be seen whether the opposition members will be present. We will, and I will say that the government is available to meet every day. We will go there this afternoon with the intention of continuing the work of the committee. I hope the opposition members are there, and I hope we can get on with the work of the committee. Like I said, we don't have much time. We need to conclude the work of the committee, get the report back to members of parliament with a view to passage on the 10th of January. That is, I believe, Monday coming. That's not a long way from now.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we have we need to put our shoulders to the wheel and get on with the work of the nation.
Minister, I know you're very optimistic that something may change overnight, and the work of the committee could be completed and the bill could be passed on at Monday's sitting. But if you're to look beyond that, maybe at a worst case scenario, should we end up in a situation where FATF we haven't been able to pass the bill and present it to FATF, should we end up in that position where FATF takes some sort of actions against Guyana, what are in a worst case scenario setting, what are some of the other implications? We are seeing some of them already.
Well, I think the potential implications have been much ventilated. Like I said, once an adverse advisory is issued on your country, financial institutions around the world and international business around the world have to exercise greater caution in conducting transactions with you. They need to demonstrate to their regulators that they have systems in place to scrutinize transactions coming out of and with transactions with Guyana at a far greater level of detail than they otherwise would have had to have done. And so I have no doubt whatsoever that doing business with Guyana, international business with Guyana, will become considerably more bureaucratic. We have seen it with international financial transactions. But I'll tell you too that a large part of this is about signaling. A large part of this is about what a development like this signals to the rest of the world about your country. We are a small, developing country trying to situate ourselves as an attractive destination for investment. We're trying to market Guyana as a good place for international business to invest. When the international business community sees that Guyana is a country perceived in an adverse manner by FATF, when potential investors, remember, every entity that comes into Guyana is raising capital, either in the capital markets or banks or from institutional investors. When an institutional investor or a bank sees that this entity that is trying to raise capital to invest in Guyana is going to a jurisdiction that does not have adequate money laundering legislation in place, the appetite to support such projects and such investments dissipates immediately. And so this threatens not only business today or transactions today that will become more difficult. This threatens Guyana's attractiveness as an investment destination. Now, it would be easy to make the mistake to think that this is a matter that would only concern large businesses. But every investor who is unable to bring his project to Guyana or to raise capital to expand his project in Guyana is, by definition, no longer able to create jobs in Guyana that would have been occupied by young and perhaps not so young Guyanese people. So an investor who is chased away is not just the investor is not coming to Guyana, it's Guyanese jobs that are being destroyed. Young Guyanese people who would have been in work, who would have found new employment, who will no longer find new employment because this new employer can no longer either commence or expand his project in Guyana. And so the signal, the adverse signal that this sends to the international community, and in particular the business and investment community, is, I think, a consequence not to be underestimated. And we have worked very hard over the last 10, 15, 20 years to make Guyana once again a reputable destination for investment. I think we have achieved that to a large extent. Today you have Canadian companies, and you have American companies, and you have Asian companies, and you have Caribbean companies anxious to invest in Guyana. Every day you hear of stories, or you read of stories, or you receive reports of Caribbean and international companies looking to do business in Guyana almost every day. And that hasn't happened by accident. It has taken hard work to restore our country to a place of attractiveness to the international investment community. And something like this could destroy all of that work and once again return Guyana to where it was. Incidentally, to where it was when Mr. Carl Greenidge presided over the economy. That is, it seems that Mr. Greenidge destroyed the economy while he was in office, and he now wants to destroy the economy when he's out of office too. It appears like he wants to repeat his performance of 1983 to 1992. He wants to repeat it from 2011 to 2014, wants to replicate and repeat that performance. It's most tragic. It's a well-known fact that Mr. Greenidge presided over the decimation of the private sector, the banishment of the entrepreneurial classes in Guyana, the acquisition by Guyana of the status of a pariah state in the international investment community. All of that happened during Mr. Greenidge's tenure while he was in office. It appears now that as the shadow finance minister, he wants to achieve once again what he achieved while he was finance minister. That is to say, the destruction of the Guyanese economy.
Minister, we have to wrap this up, but your final call to all stakeholders, including the political parties, as it relates to this bill, because I think the fundamental here is to put Guyana first, is to protect the interest of Guyana and the people in Guyana.
Well, first of all, I will speak to the non-governmental and non-parliamentary stakeholders, people like the Private Sector Commission and others, the labour unions and so on, so many of whom have said to me they are concerned about this matter. I say it to the non-parliamentary stakeholders, the non-governmental and non-parliamentary stakeholders. Notwithstanding the opposition's clear intent to muzzle you and to deny you a voice, you must not be cowed into silence. You have an interest that is a legitimate interest in this matter. Workers are affected. Businesses are affected. You have the right. This is still a free country. You have the right to express your views. And even if the opposition does not want you to express those views in the parliament by way of a petition, you have the right to express those views. And the same concerns that have been expressed to me so many times privately, I would say to the non-governmental stakeholders, do not be cowed into silence by the opposition's clear intent to muzzle you. To the parliamentary stakeholders, this is to say particularly my colleagues on the opposite side of the House, I would say that surely you must have a conscience. And you must, as elected representatives of the people, be willing to put Guyana first. You can't speak of a social compact, as Mr. Granger recently did. In 1 week, in one breath, speak of a social compact. And in the next week, say to the private sector, you don't have a seat at the table and you have no right to come into this room. The two don't go with it. They don't fit. There is a blatant inconsistency. What is this social compact that they're speaking of? If the private sector of Guyana does not have a place in the room, what is this social compact? They don't want to meet with the government on the budget. They have refused our invitation to meet with government on the budget. They have refused to accommodate the private sector in the room. They have denied the private sector the opportunity to table a petition. They have said to the private sector, we don't care what the consequences are for your businesses or for jobs in Guyana. We will obstruct this money laundering bill, irrespective of its consequences, because we want to extract some other unrelated political concession. What is this social compact of which they speak? Who are their partners? Is it government? Is it the private sector? Is it the workers who will not be able to get jobs that potentially could be created by investors who will be chased away from Guyana. And so I say to my parliamentary colleagues, particularly, like I said, on that side of the House, that this double speak must stop. If you are serious about working with other parties and other stakeholders, demonstrate that in your actions. Don't use cliches and catchphrases. Social compact might be a nice catchphrase that the opposition may have read of somewhere. They may be mimicking something that they may have heard some other countries doing, so it sounded like a nice phrase for them to use. It has a meaning. If you are sincere about this social compact concept, demonstrate it in your actions. Open the door and let the private sector walk in. We're not even asking them for them to speak. Let them just walk in and have a chair and silently be able to sit and observe. I think a social compact means much more than the private sector just sitting silently and observing. But to begin with, to take the first step to demonstrate that you meant it when you said that you're interested in a social compact, open the door and let the private sector at least have a silent chair, even if they have a muzzle over their mouth. At least they'll be able to observe silently. So I say to them once again, the double speak must stop. And Guyana must be put first, and the Guyanese people must be put first. And a good start would be this money laundering bill. This is a good test. This is a good test to determine who is sincere about putting Guyana and the Guyanese people first.
Minister, I want to thank you very much for joining me today to discuss what is happening at the level of the Special Select Committee as it relates to the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism amendment bill. So I want to thank you very much again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Eddie, once again for inviting me.
And thank you very much for joining us at home.